Hello, Flosstube. The title of this episode is Stitching on the Dalmatian Coast. Not stitching in a Dalmatian coat. Clearly there's been some sort of mix-up in our wardrobe department. I will get things straightened out, and I will be back shortly with our regularly scheduled programming. There, that is much better. It's 90 degrees out today, and that coat was pretty hot. My name is Deb. I am the Traveling Stocking Stitcher, and today's episode is entitled Stitching on the Dalmatian Coast, because I recently took a tour of Croatia and Slovenia, and we tacked a couple of days on our own in Amsterdam. Now, if you're not familiar geographically or historically with the region, those two countries used to be part of the former Yugoslavia, and it's kind of a boomerang-shaped, Croatia's kind of a boomerang-shaped country, and there's a mass more inland, and then it goes along, it's on the other side of the Adriatic Sea of Italy. So if you think of the Italian boot, you've got the back of the boot running here, and Croatia on the other side, and the Dalmatian coast tapers down to a tiny point at the end. And by the way, Dalmatia actually is where that dog breed originates from. So, and Slovenia is just up a little northwest of Croatia. A lot of people have asked why Croatia and Slovenia, and I had booked a air and hotel package back in 2019, very end of 2019, and we all know what happened to those plans. I was going to go to Prague, and then in May of 2020, didn't happen. So then I had this credit. I didn't ask for a refund because no one imagined that it would take 3 years to start traveling again. But then when I started looking at what was available, I originally was looking at possibly doing Vienna and Prague and Hungary. They had a package that was like that. But then looked on the map, and Hungary shares a border with Ukraine, and countries in Europe are about the size of states in the U.S., and I didn't want to be like one Wisconsin away from a war zone. So I thought, even though the State Department didn't have any travel advisories against it, I thought, well, let's try something different, and the days worked out. And Croatia is 20% of their GDP is tourism, and so they're it's a beautiful country, a lot of mountains and greenery, and unfortunately we had a lot of rain, and I'll talk about the rain a little bit, but yeah, very lovely country. Slovenia was actually extremely beautiful as well, so glad we went and had a great time. And one of the other reasons for taking a tour, which we've not done before, was the fact that Croatia doesn't have a real robust train system for getting around the country, so that means we would have to drive, which means whoever's driving doesn't get to look at stuff, and sometimes it can be in mountainous regions, which there was a time when on the bus when you couldn't see a car length ahead of you because it was misty and rainy, and very glad we were not driving that day. And then you have issues with a lot of the historic areas in European cities are pedestrianized, and they have parking bans, and you can't park certain places, or you have to have a permit, and you can't park close to where you want to go to see the stuff, and so having a car is a real hassle. So taking a bus, having a drive, and because of that boomerang shape of Croatia, it would take every day, well, not every day, probably it was a 10-day tour. I would say probably 7 of the days we probably drove, 6-7 days, and for at least 2, maybe 3 hours a day. So it was a great way to use them for the transportation. So before we get started on talking about Croatia and Slovenia, I do have a finish from the last time we saw each other, and I had done an episode on Granada, Spain, and I was working on a piece from the Alhambra, or what I have interpreted as the Alhambra. It's a piece from Vivian Powers as the designer, and she is the Vivsters, and I just love her designs. This is the second one I've done now, and I showed it earlier. It was about half done. I think about half, maybe a quarter to a half done, and I've got it finished now. I've added the name Alhambra at the bottom, and this is what it looks like. It's done on 18 count, yep, 18 count dirty, and I did not iron it. Not to apologize because I've been busy, I've been out of town, so I don't have it framed or anything. But at the bottom I also put Alhambra in kind of a Arabic script, and used all the colors that were up in the design itself. So I'll get a little closer in here. A couple of things I made changes to. See these squares I talked about, how the squares on the design on the archway, they were actually ecru right on white, and they were not showing up at all. You could not see anything. So I first tried to use, I looked at the DMC family chart and found the next, I actually might have gone 2 intensities up from ecru to try to just use a single stitch to stitch over the design, and that didn't help any either. So I finally just said, I'm going to take one of these, I think one of these yellows here, and stitch right over the top, and actually it gives it a little bit of an embossed feel. It stands out just a little bit. So I don't regret doing that. I just love this archway here and the shadow that you see of the doorway, and yeah, I just love her designs. So one of these days, once I get my pictures all done, I like to do photo books of trip pictures, so that's kind of taken my focus away a little bit from my stitching as well. So there is Arabian Nights. What I took long, I was intending, in my last video I mentioned that I thought I was going to maybe do some Denmark stitching of Copenhagen. I'd been to probably 10 years ago, and I knew I had 2 patterns that didn't have a ton of colors. I was going to do on 14 count. It was going to be easy stitching on the plane, on the bus, whatever. Well, got on the plane. It was a late flight. We didn't leave till like 9:30, and so they turned off all the lights, and I sat and watched a bunch of movies instead. Didn't stitch either on the way out or on the way back. The bus, I mean, I was looking out the window. I didn't want to stitch while I was on the bus. So I stitched a little bit in hotel rooms here and there, but didn't accomplish nearly as much. But shortly before I left, I started panic kitting, because you start thinking about the fact that if we get COVID, they take you out of the tour, and apparently the last tour that our tour manager had, 2 people had gotten COVID and had to be taken out of the tour. But in Slovenia, I read that there was an automatic, or you had to have a 10-day quarantine, regardless of whether you were tested negative before that 10 days was up. So I could just see me sitting in a hotel room and having stitched everything I could get my hands on, and still having time on my hands and days left to stitch. So I started thinking, well, let's look. So the first thing that I'll show you is the 2 that I was planning on taking anyway. And so this is, it looks like what the marina, I guess I would call it, of Nyhavn, where the boats are in Copenhagen, and it's from Lifted Spirit Patterns on Etsy, and I was going to do this on light blue, so I don't have to do the sky and possibly not even the water. I'd be able to cheat that way. So this one I thought was going to be pretty straightforward to stitch, and I'm still planning on doing it someday, just didn't luckily have a reason to get around to it. And then the other one I was going to bring with me it's a map of Denmark. And this one's from Zephyr Mood, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it on red fabric. I'll put the map in the middle that kind of looks like Copenhagen, and then at the bottom the Danish flag is red with a white cross, or a kind of offset cross on there, and I'll either put the name Denmark somewhere on the flag, either on the stripe itself or on the flag. So those will be my 2 Copenhagen pieces from Denmark. There's also another map of Denmark similar to this on Etsy from Stitch Lover's Shop, and there's another one from Vlada X Stitch. So there's like 3, if you're interested in these, there's like 3 different choices of maps of Denmark that show a picture of Denmark in the map. And then the third thing I was going to kit up then was, I've talked about Awesome Pattern Studio in the past, and they have a lot of cities that they have done, and they have a Copenhagen one, so I pulled that one out and said, oh, I'll start working on Copenhagen. But unlike most of the others, it had a ton of colors. There's really a lot of colors, and I didn't want to bring that many along. So I ditched that, and I decided to bring London from Emma Congdon from Stitch Robia, and I can do that on a 14 count white, and it was minimal colors again. Oh no, wait a minute, I'm going to do that one on blue, I think. I don't remember. But I'll be, it's an easy stitch. That's one, even though it wasn't Denmark, at least it was something to stitch in that theoretical hotel room that I was in for 10 days. That didn't happen. Thank you. And so I've got one other piece, and I'll show you that little later on, where I actually showed you some video of me stitching in Slovenia. So we'll take a look at that. Our first stop in Croatia was in Zagreb, the capital city, and one of the oldest architectural sites there is St. Mark's Church. Looks like this. And the first thing my husband said when he saw it, he said, "That looks like cross stitch. The roof has these tiles on top." And I said, "You know, you're absolutely right." And so I could probably design something like that myself. I mean, it's pretty clear, but I don't know what the bottom of the church looks like, because it was covered with scaffolding, and I mean, I could look at a picture of it and probably figure it out. Actually, I did look at a picture of it. It's kind of like a white building, so it wouldn't be that hard to do. So who knows? Maybe I'll design something of my own. So to represent Zagreb, Awesome Pattern Studio again has, and they also have Awesome Beads World. I think this is fairly new. It's part of the same company, but a lot of their designs they have with beading instead of just cross stitching. So that's kind of an interesting alternative. The thing that, as I stitched a few of these Awesome Pattern Studio, the colors are sort of interpretive. They aren't the actual colors of things sometimes, and it makes it almost a little difficult to distinguish, because a lot of the buildings, you know, look sort of, you know, sort of the same. So when they're not the same color that they were when you saw them, it's like, well, I think that's that church, but a lot of churches look like that over in Europe. So makes it a little harder to figure out what it is. I found also another Croatian design from, it's called Embroidy DIY, EMBROIDIY. I will put that up on the screen because it's hard to read, hard to say. And this one seems to have sort of an amalgamation of different cities in Croatia. So I think it's got St. Mark's Church in Zagreb, clearly, and the cathedral that is in Zagreb. Seems quite recognizable. But the others might be other cities, like the tower. Looks like it might be the tower in the town of Split that we went to, also on the Dalmatian coast. So the next place that we went was Ljubljana, and it is the capital of Slovenia. And this was a really beautiful town. And had we seen it when it was not pouring rain? Actually, I say it had been raining for weeks. Apparently they'd had as much rain as they've had in 30 years. And so we saw a lot of places that were flooded, and it wasn't like soaking wet kind of rain, but enough to make you feel like you're out in the rain. And it was gray, and everything looked so much better with sunshine on it. But Ljubljana, apparently the water in the river has this lovely color to it that we didn't see. So I had a hard time finding anything that depicted this. Awesome Pattern Studio is the only one I could find, and again, the thing with the colors thing is starting to throw me a little bit. I have a little trouble with that. And on there, you know, you can identify the Dragon Bridge. There is a square called Prešernov Square, and that's clearly identified there. There's out of the back, there's this skyscraper, very generic 20th century looking skyscraper thing that I would probably chart a castle on the top, because there is this castle on the top of a hill of Ljubljana that looks down into the city, and so that's probably what I would do if I were to get that and stitch that up. After we left Ljubljana, we went to Lake Bled, also in Slovenia, and the weather broke the next day, and that morning we were able to go up to the up a mountain. It's in the Julian Alps, they call it, and there was this castle at the top of overlooking the lake, and we were able to tour that, and it was beautiful out, and the weather was gorgeous. After we did that, came back down and had some free time, walked around the lake. Took about 2 hours or so to walk around the lake and the surrounding areas, and a lot of almost Swiss influence in the architecture and the buildings. Then I got to do a little stitching on our little veranda overlooking the lake. So let's go to the videotape. Hello, Flosstube. This is beautiful Lake Bled in Slovenia. Earlier today we climbed to the top of, or we didn't climb, we visited the castle at the top there, and this afternoon, after walking around the lake, I got a chance to do some stitching. So this is what I've been working on. This is from the Vivsters, and this is Portuguese Orange Portuguese Orange Tree Tiles. And it had not a lot of colors, so it was a good option to take along on the road. This is what I've got. And that's it for now. See you later, Flosstube. Yet another, my third in a row, from the Vivsters, Vivian Powers, Portuguese Orange Tree Tiles. And to me it looks like Seville. Seville is known for its oranges, and they're also known for these blue and white tiles as well. So that's most of the progress that I made on the trip. I'll show you what I've done since then at the end of this episode. But when we left Slovenia, then we went to Plitvice Lakes, and this is a national park, and it's known for its waterfalls. And because of the massive amount of rain that they had, 2 days before we were supposed to go to the park, it had actually been closed, which our tour manager said she'd not heard of, and she's been doing tours for 10 or 12 years. And it's just unheard of that they've had so much rain, because once you get there, you realize you're walking on boardwalks that are right in front of the falls. And because it had been raining as much as it had, I mean, as we were driving around there, you could see the countryside. I took this out of the bus where you could see the water raging through the town. So good news, when you want to see waterfalls, a lot of water, a lot of rain is good for the waterfalls. Bad news, you got to walk on boardwalks that are harrowing. It was really kind of frightening. But 2 days before, it had closed, and then the day before, they had opened it, but you couldn't get to the biggest waterfall. The day we went, it was open. There were still some things closed, so we had an abbreviated trip, but at least we were able to look down from one set of waterfalls, and we could walk across these planks. It was terrifying. Walk across these planks to get to the big waterfall. And you could see there was a point where because the water was so high, I mean, it's just a boardwalk that's wide enough for two people coming and going, and people would stop and take pictures, and other people would walk around them, and I was holding on for dear life to my phone because I was afraid. But you would see the water running right over underneath you. There was a plank where the water had risen up over the walkboard and boardwalk. So if you'd fallen off of that thing, you'd go right down the river, and there were rocks and a big fall, and yeah, I didn't take a ton of pictures, but I took some. And then again, with the sun not out, the water apparently is just this unbelievable turquoise color when the sun's out, and it's beautiful. But it was still a lovely experience. When I got back to the hotel, it was only then that I decided to Google deaths in Plitvice Lakes National Park. It turns out, though, they didn't mention anything about drownings. There was a lot of stupid people falling off of cliffs or jumping on fences trying to get the best selfie and fall into their deaths, those kinds of things. But apparently people up walking up and down that boardwalk without guardrails, without handrails of any kind, and are just fine. Tried to find something. I was not having much luck. The only thing that it's not entitled Plitvice Falls, but something to stitch that would remind me of this is called Majestic Waterfall and Forest Landscape Counted Cross-Stitch Pattern Autumn Trees National Park. Kind of a mouthful, but it's from Laser Arts Designs. I'm not much of a big full coverage person, but this is as close as I could find to kind of what it looks like. So after we left there, we got into now Dalmatia. The first town we stopped in was the town of Split, and this is a UNESCO site because there was a Roman emperor in 305 AD, Emperor Diocletian. Apparently he was from there, and so he wanted to retire in his hometown, so he built this palace. It's this square surrounding thing. Inside there's shops and people live in there, and it's got a lot of a Venetian influence because Venice is just across the Adriatic Sea. And there's a promenade that goes along the waterfront. As far as stitching things, Awesome Pattern Studio, again, has a version of Split. It's got the peristyle, which is the center square within the palace, and there's a bell tower, and You can see the Croatian National Theater, the Yellow Building. And then our final stop in Croatia was the town of Dubrovnik. So in Dubrovnik you can actually walk up along the city walls. There's huge fortifications, and it's looking out on the Adriatic Sea, and they have big turrets and forts and castles, and well, they're not castles, but they look like it. They're very imposing stone structures, and you can walk all the way around and look down into the city and out to the water. Croatian War for Independence, when they broke away from Yugoslavia. There were 824 buildings in the old town that are within the city walls, and 563 of those, over 68%, were hit by projectiles during the siege. So you can tell there are some buildings that still have kind of the brownish roof tiles, and the brighter orange ones are the newer tiles. While we were there in Dubrovnik, I actually saw some stitching, live and in person. There was a woman, there are actually two women, I don't think it was the same woman. They were on either side of the town, and I walked through the town more than once, but they were dressed in an outfit that had a lot of stitching on it, and they were selling stitched items, and she was actually stitching while she was there selling things. So I did a little research, and there is Carnival embroidery. Apparently that's a region in Dubrovnik, near Dubrovnik, and traditionally each spring the girls would grow silkworms in their bedrooms. And I actually did read a story that said that they put the silkworms, the eggs, a moth will produce like 500 eggs, and they put them in their bosom, that was the word that they used that I read, and hatch the eggs and to make their own silk. They feed them a bunch of mulberry leaves, and it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to grow to their full potential, which is about 3 to 3.5 inches. And then they start to spin their cocoon, and they rotate their head in a little figure-8 shape. They dip it into boiling water, and they soften and dissolve the section, and then unwind it. But each cocoon produces over 3,000 feet of silk thread. They said 900 meters, and I converted that to 3,000 feet. I think I did the conversion correctly. I asked Google to convert it, so that seems like a lot. 3,000 feet of silk from one cocoon. But what happens is these girls stitch. As they're growing up, they stitch everything that they're going to need, So their trousseau, their wedding dress, the dress that they're going to be buried in, the traditional garb that they would use probably for going to church or whatever. But then once they get married, they don't stitch again. That's it. They have everything they need. They have other things to do, and that's all the stitching they ever do. So it's kind of sad, actually. But except maybe that woman never got married because she was a fairly old woman. I don't know. But I did see stitching in the wild in Dubrovnik. For Dubrovnik, one that I really want to stitch is from Lifted Spirits Pattern. There's a Croatian map from Stitch Lover's Shop, which is another possible option that might work. And then my awesome pattern studio choice for Dubrovnik. You can see what's called Onofrio's Fountain. Looks like this. It's kind of in the middle, a round fountain. St. Blaise Church is on here as well, and then the walls of Dubrovnik down here, the little tiny little walls, and that's not representative at all. So yeah, I don't know if I would do that one or not. So, or I'd have to rework it somehow. That kind of covers the trip to Croatia and Slovenia. As I said, we did go to Amsterdam. I will cover that probably in a future episode. Whether I did order a few things to stitch that remind me of Amsterdam. So maybe sooner than later I might have something to show you on that. But I will show you what I have accomplished since I've been back. Like I say, I've been working on photo books and other things. But this is the current progress I have on Portuguese Orange Tree Tiles. It's on 18 count white, because the tiles are white. So I've got, part of the archway there. I've got, there's a lot of this border. It's going to take a lot of work because there's like a 4-row all the way around the perimeter black, and then there's also a 3-row perimeter that goes around the inner section here. So there's going to be a lot of black stitching on there, but actually it's going pretty well, pretty fast. There's, again, not a ton of colors, so that was my criteria for taking it along. So, and then finally, thank yous. Been traveling, so I have not been watching a lot of Flosstube. However, somebody must have shouted me out, and I don't know who to thank, because my last video was, over a month old. I'm at least a week late on getting this one out. But, they taper off after a while. People watch the newest things, and YouTube offers up the latest videos. But all of a sudden, I got this spike, and was going through the roof, and I got a lot of subscribers, and I would like to know who to thank. So if you are here because somebody recently in the last month or so told you, actually probably in the last week or so, in late May, told you to watch my video, I have them to thank for it, and I would like to thank them. So let me know if that's how you got here. What I typically do when people shout me out is I put them in my playlist at the end that for their episodes, so that if you watched me, you can easily get to their video as well. So if you like my stuff, you probably will like them, and I would like to appreciate and thank them for recommending them to other people. So tell me who they are, and I'll make sure they're in the playlist. And then Judy of City Stitcher, she has been mentioning my channel because she realized that she has the Christmas bells design that I made into a Christmas stocking, and then I charted the words, the music and the words to the song, the sheet music beneath that, and made it into a stocking. So Judy wants to make just not a stocking, but she wants to do the same concept. And so I told her I would help her out with that, because there's 2 versions of the song, so I need to just find out which version she has a preference for. And then how many, I did 2 verses of the song, and so I have to find out. I think there's like 6 verses, so how much we need to chart, I don't know. But I recommend you check Judy out. She's always a very enjoyable, fun one to watch as well. So thanks, Judy. And that's pretty much all I have for now. Don't have any plans of where I'm going next, but I've been places that I haven't stitched yet, so someday I'll get back to stitching stockings again, probably once summer is over at least. So you can follow me on Instagram. I am traveling, 1L, _stocking_stitcher. And as always, you can find me here. I usually do these once a month. So thank you so much for coming and coming on the trip with me. I was glad to have you on board. And thank you again.